Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Detective Damon Martin.
And I'm in the box.
And actually, you are kind of like just a
I
shaky
am
head
in
right
a
now.
box. Yeah, I am just a floating head. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. So, Patrick, tonight it is the 30th anniversary, technically, coming up this year in 1995. The 30th anniversary of Seven, which was re-released into theaters in the IMAX, and they are releasing a 4K print of the film that David Fincher personally worked on and got ready for release. Comes out in a couple weeks. So we thought, what better time? And not to bury the lead in our review here, Patrick, but we are about to review what I consider, and I know you did a post on this on your TikTok, what is honestly a perfect film, Seven.
Yes, Damon, one of the perfect films indeed. Starring Gwyneth Paltrow as Tracy, Brad Pitt as Mills, Morgan Freeman as Somerset. Written by Andrew Kevin Walker, as you mentioned, directed by David Fincher, with a budget of $33 million and a gross worldwide box office of $328 million. Seven has finally landed on the podcast, Damon, and there are two deadly sins right in front of you right now. Me and Damon here to talk about what is indeed one of the perfect films of all time, Seven.
I don't like to use the word perfect too often because part of being critical about film is being able to be honest about it. Even films that you and I have adored were like, well, this was something maybe a little off. Or, again, we've definitely had podcasts where we've just heaped praise on movies.
Yeah.
But I don't like to use the word perfect because that really means there's not a flaw, like at all. There's not a single flaw. And critical analysis kind of lends you to just finding something, right? Like that's just like, okay, maybe this could have been stronger, or that could have been stronger, or maybe the cinematographer was low, whatever. So I don't like to use that term very often. I don't use it loosely. But when I say it about this film, and I've seen Seven dozens of times, but I just saw it in IMAX over the weekend. Patrick, this is a perfect film from start to finish. This is an absolute masterpiece.
It really is interesting that I think of like I only have a handful of what I consider perfect films, and Alien is obviously one of them. And I've combed over that movie endless times, and I'm like, I don't. There's no flaws in this movie. There just isn't. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, while imperfect in many ways, that creates its perfection. And much like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Seven has something in common with the 1979 or 74 classic, is that they're lightning in a bottle films. It's like if it would have happened a few months earlier or later, or the director of Christmas Vacation had ended up directing it or something, this movie would not be what it is. It's that all the pieces fell into place in just the right way, and everybody executed their art in just the right way, and you end up with this movie that defies genre. It defies, I think, your standard crime thriller. It just is something that stands out completely on its own. It's one of these singular pieces of work. And it's so funny, Damon, like, we spent last year talking about the Alien franchise. And when it came to David Fincher, that was his first film ever, was Alien 3. A movie that he hates so badly, he refuses to speak about it. Like he's that. Meanwhile, that's still a better part three than most part ones of a lot of movies. Like it's just, that's how good David Fincher is. This was his follow up. A few years later, he brushed off all the pain and trauma of making that movie and said, I'm going to step into the director's chair one more time on a feature length film. He was a very accomplished music video and commercial director. He's like, let's do it again. This time, let's do it with this crazy, serial killer movie. And he turned in something that I think there's just not a note wrong on this. And what do you think it is, Damon? What is it about? Because I think of Silence of the Lambs too. I don't know if I'm going to call Silence of the Lambs a perfect movie. I don't comb over it the same way that I have with a movie like Seven, but it's up there. I mean, and I feel like these are comparable films. Is it something about like a detective or a couple of detectives like on the hunt for this almost supernatural killer, this killer that's smarter than everyone else, that's faster than everyone else, that has everything figured out, What is it about that makes us just go, "Whoa, shit, this is so fucking rad"?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here. One, I think we all, and I know I mentioned this on the podcast before, we all love a good puzzle, right? Like we all love a good puzzle. We like to figure things out. And when you look at Seven and even when you look at even Silence of the Lambs, like it's not like you're trying to figure out who is the killer when I say the
Right.
puzzle. I just mean like watching the detectives put the puzzle pieces together, right? Like this isn't Knives Out where you're watching, which is a great movie by the way, but Knives
Right.
Out you're like, is that the killer? Is that it's not that kind of mystery, not that kind of puzzle. But you're trying to put things together like what is the motive? What is the machinations of this killer? That's one. And then two, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, this is just my theory, but I think anytime you delve into what could be real life, it's that much scarier.
Yeah,
Because
that's
as
the
much
Texas Chainsaw factor. Yeah.
as much as I love Nightmare on Elm Street, and I do, you know this, as much as you love Jason and Friday the 13th,
Yeah.
ultimately, as fun as those movies are, and as much as we are obsessed with those films, Freddy can't really exist. Jason can't really exist. Michael Myers can't really exist, not in the form that he became, anyways. Um, those are fun, and we loved them. We absolutely adore those films. But even like a Scream, which again, I know people say, oh, it's loosely based. I understand. Like even that's
Yeah.
a little bit closer to reality, even though again, I think there's so many things you would figure out in a real Scream case, especially with cell phones these days. But that's a whole other conversation. But supernatural killers, while they are great and we love them, we know it's ultimately a fictional story. When you get to something like Silence of the Lambs, which was loosely based on a real person, Ed Gein, who actually did kill and eat people in the whatever it was, the 30s or 40s or wherever he was alive, and then you look at a movie like Seven, which is a brutal, sadistic serial killer carrying out these ritualistic murders based upon the seven deadly sins. I'm sure if we comb through the annals of criminal history, somebody probably has started or done something to that effect. I'm not saying to the exacting nature of John Doe, but somebody has done that. I mean, come on, there's a lot of religious fanaticism out there. I think when you delve into the mystery and then the reality, and look, as much as I love supernatural horror films, and I do, when you delve into something that could actually happen, as wild as crazy as this movie is, and again, you'd really be dealing with a true psychopath slash sociopath to get a guy like John Doe in real life. But I mean, I've read stories, I've watched Mindhunter. I know some of these are
Yeah.
wild out there stories. So I think when you delve into that reality of like this could actually happen, that's that much scarier, and I think it draws people in.
I think you're right. It really taps into something primal, right? Like what out there in the dark is the real threat to me? Well, in the modern world, the real threat to you is your fellow man. Like that's actually the real threat to you. And so that I think on a base level that 100% works. Why I think movies like Silence of the Lambs and tonight's movie Seven really work is that they do indeed lean into horror. And this is where David Fincher, I think, really started to shine as he was like, yeah, we're going to do the serial killer movie, but I need to create a world. And he's an incredible world builder, David Fincher. He needed to build this world that lent itself to horror. Now, back in 1995, when this movie came out, you weren't lighting movies like this. You weren't lighting movies where the characters are almost always on the shadow side. Like, I mean, when I say shadow side, that's a very common way to shoot cinematically. But I'm talking like they're in silhouette almost. They're almost in the dark, in the shadows. That was like step one. And David Fincher himself is actually a pretty accomplished cinematographer. Then it's like paint all the walls black, like everywhere. The police station has dark walls. John Doe's apartment is literally painted black. Every hallway is underlit. You're living in the shadows. Everything is dark and scary. It's raining all the time. It's an unnamed city, but they shot in L.A. He chose the oldest parts of downtown LA to represent sort of this timeless, sort of almost gothic horror. You know what I mean? Like tall, ornate buildings and spiraling staircases and dark shadows and dripping rain and mist, and everybody looks You know, they look like they're on the hunt for Jack the Ripper in the 1800s, like you know, walking through England. He sets a tone that is very much a horror tone. And then he even chooses so wisely. This is something I really loved and picked up on this time. When you first get your first glimpse of John Doe in silhouette, he looks like like the quickest thing I could think of was what's his name? Uh, 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 the Liam Neeson character, the one that Josh Rubin is trying to redo.
Oh, Darkman.
Darkman. Like there's almost a Darkman silhouette. You know what I mean? He's in an overcoat. He's got a hat on. It's romantic. It's set in, you know, at the time it's set in a modern time. It's not like set somewhere in the past, but he chose classic horror tropes and painted that over the top of a standard serial killer movie. So you set a visual tone, you set an audio tone. You know, another thing like Fincher brought with him, he's a very accomplished music video director. He brought with him sort of those scratchy, weird sounds from like Nine Inch Nails music videos, and everything about it just felt raw and nasty. Like in the 2000s, when we were doing remakes of every single classic horror movie, they all looked and felt like music videos. Guess where they got that idea from? They got it from David Fincher. David Fincher was doing in 1995 what people didn't bother to do for another 5 to 10 to 15 years. It was groundbreaking. And the only other movie that I could even remotely compare it to at the time was Silence of the Lambs, which to me actually felt very like almost like at times a classic horror. It felt like almost like a Hammer film, you know, like Hannibal Lecter was in that dungeon, you know, like a brick wall dungeon. Like it was classic monster stuff, and I felt it here. I felt it with that 90s edge, that sort of you listen to a lot of industrial, and you probably wear some leather and shit like that, like you're one of those guys in the 90s. Like he added that in, and it's again lightning in a bottle. When all these things come together and coalesce at the exact right time, you get a movie like Seven.
And I think also one of the things that this movie, I mean, again, you can have a great script, you can have a great director, you can have great cinematography, you can have all this, but it also comes down to the right casting. And I
Yeah.
read a lot of interviews with David Fincher and Andrew Kevin Walker talking about they got Morgan Freeman very early on. He signed on to do this very early on. Morgan Freeman's one of the greatest living actors to ever step in front of a screen, period. Like, he's amazing. Like, he is an incredible actor, lifetime achievement of like just an IMDb page filled of great performances. You anchor your film with Morgan Freeman, you're already ahead of the race. Like, you're already ahead of the race. And I would argue this to me is Morgan Freeman's best performance. Now, I love Morgan Freeman. Shawshank Redemption, of course, all-time classic. I love that as well. But I would argue this is his best because he is so methodical in the way he approaches this role. And it's so good. So so now you've set the stage. You got Morgan Freeman as your lead, okay? Then you get a guy like Brad Pitt, who at the time I think they said was coming right off of Interview with the Vampire, and obviously had gotten a lot of praise after Thelma and Louise. So he's still very young. He wasn't the Brad Pitt of now, where Brad Pitt is just a full movie star. You put Brad Pitt's name on a poster, and people are like, oh, Brad Pitt, I'm going to go see this. But he was a really young, up-and-coming star at that point. Like, you know, Interview with the Vampire got a lot of press. He was there. I think Legends of the Fall was right around that same time.
Yeah.
So he was on his rise to being the Brad Pitt we all know. So you get him to be the co-lead. Then you get Gwyneth Paltrow, who is, listen, she's a kooky lady these days, but she is an incredible actor. And in that role, like putting her particularly in that role. And then you fill it out with like excellent character actor. Richard Roundtree.
Oh man.
Movie.
I know Shaft is in this movie.
Arlie Ermy, who of course we all know from Full Metal Jacket, he plays the captain. John C. McGinley, who I love, he plays the California, the leader of the SWAT team. Like,
yes.
you pepper in these, and obviously we're going to talk eventually about Kevin Spacey because you don't do this movie and you don't get this movie without Kevin Spacey. We're going to talk about him a little later. But the casting is perfect. Like, this is, like I said, you talk about lightning in a bottle. This is the definition of that because there's so many things that can go wrong in a production of a film when you're putting it together. And again, we just talked, I mean, I know people who are watching this on YouTube didn't hear the intro, and I'll bring it up here now. when this originally was going to go, you mentioned it. The guy who was originally going to direct this was a guy named Jeremiah Chechik. He was the director of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Sounds bizarre that he was interested in doing this, but he read the script. He's like, I like it, but I want a totally different ending. And it was greenlit. It was going to get made. And Andrew Kevin Walker was so young, he's like, well, sure, I'll rewrite my ending because I guess that's what you do. So he did. He didn't like it, but he's like, hey, I'm getting my movie made. It was like they were going to pay him enough money he could move from New York to LA. So he's like, sure, I'll change my movie. I had no idea I was not supposed to do that, or I should fight harder. That could have happened. We could be talking about a movie that went straight to DVD or just ended up being like a low budget thriller or a totally different cast. I always marvel. I think I've mentioned this on the show before. Heat, which to me is one of the 10 greatest movies ever made, Michael Mann's Heat with Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. I mean, that is just, again, like a perfect film.
Yeah.
That was a remake of a TV movie called LA Takedown. If you go on YouTube, you can watch it. It's called LA Take. It is bad. It is real bad, but it's Michael Mann. He wrote it, same time, and like the lines are the same. You can watch that dinner scene between Neil and Al Pacino's character, and the dialogue is almost identical, but the acting is so bad. It was like a made-for-TV movie. It was so bad. The fact that they made that in like 89 or whatever, and the Michael Mann revisited it 6 years later and made Heat, which at the time didn't get the love it deserved. It should have been a massive hit. It wasn't. It became a cult classic later. But that's like the rarest thing. That never happens. Like that should never happen to where you're like, you know what? This was actually a really good idea, but it sucked. So I'm going to redo it with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. That never happens. To do what they did with Se7en, to get Morgan Freeman, to get Brad Pitt, to get Gwyneth Paltrow, and then again, fill in all these side characters and all these character actors. Again, you could not, like, I saw an interview with Andrew Kevin Walker, and they said, what would you think if they ever decide to remake Se7en? He's like, I hope they never do. No, the fuck you should not. I'm not saying anyone has that idea, by the way. I'm not saying like there's an idea out there someone wants to remake Se7en. I'm saying don't ever contemplate it. This is a perfect movie from start to finish. Everything, the casting, the location, the cinematography. This is a perfect movie, so don't mess with it. And again, it's just all these little puzzle pieces that fit together that make Se7en what it is.
There's so much, there's so much I want to touch on here, but going off of what you just said, one thing, first of all, is influence, right? This is a very influential movie. Tell me you didn't get Inception vibes all over this movie. Okay, and you brought up Heat, and I remember watching Heat one day, and I texted you, and I go, Chris Nolan put based his whole career off of Heat. Like you can see every Christopher Nolan movie in Heat, and he's, by the way, he's hosted like panels on it. Like he's obsessed with that movie too. He loves it, and it clearly defines him. I'm watching Se7en and I go, oh my God, there's that moment from Inception. There's that moment from Inception. Like it's all the fact that it's like raining in Inception, like all that shit is happening. And here's another thing what Fincher was doing, which by the way is not a new technique at all, but filling your movie out with character actors. That's such a smart thing to do. It's like I need a guy who's the commissioner. Richard Roundtree, first of all, big name out of the 70s, huge name out of the 70s. Then he gets sort of like this prestige role where he's in a very different suit, basically. You know, he's all pinned up, but you're like, hey, it's fucking Richard Roundtree. Like it's one of those things like snaps in your mind. It's like, hey, that's that guy who's, by the way, done like 150 films at that point. So he's also just good on screen. That's something Christopher Nolan stole. He's like, I'm going to round my whole roster out with great character actors because they will fill those roles out, and add that color, that thing that just builds the world up and just makes it feel fuller and more interesting, more cinematic. When you say cinematic these days, people roll their eyes. They go, what the fuck you mean cinematic? This guy's over here, another art goon. It's the point is like to actually separate you out and show you something magical, whether it's like a real life situation that can actually happen or a true full-blown fantasy movie or a comic book movie. When it's cinematic, all of a sudden you're on the ride, which is what we want. And I'm gonna back all the way up to what you were talking about with getting Morgan Freeman. This is something that becomes a staple of David Fincher films, and that is the obsessive compulsive main character. All of his movies have one of these characters who are basically just in their own heads. Morgan Freeman plays this guy so well. By the way, I've never seen anyone play that obsessive compulsive the way Morgan Freeman plays it. Very understated, very, very measured person, who clearly has such high dysfunction because of his obsessive compulsiveness that he's never had kids. You know, this is a guy who's going to retire. When you meet him in the movie, he's about to retire. He's never had kids. He had one potential marriage that ended in not a great way, and that's because he was so obsessed with his work. He didn't know how to turn that part of himself off. When you meet him, he's asking questions, and another cop's annoyed at him. He's like, "Hey, you with your fucking questions." Like he's literally just destroyed his world, and that's where we meet him. His world is crumbling
And
down. He can't.
and he and he hates the world. I mean, he's gotten to the point like
That's what I was getting at.
like he talks
He
about like having a kid, and he's like, I couldn't bring a kid into this world. Like that's how much he hates the world he lives in. He's like, I couldn't bring a kid into this world.
and when the captain goes to him like, "You're not retiring. What the hell are you talking about, Somerset?" He goes, "I have to. I have to get out of this city. I have to get out of the hell that this is because my mind is fully obsessed and invested in this, and every day something worse shows up." Well, on the day we meet him, the worst thing shows up, which is this serial killer who's incredibly methodical and incredibly efficient. And this is very important, Damon, and this is another thing that Christopher Nolan, I believe, has taken. John Doe, or the Seven Deadly Sins serial killer, is the shadow self of Somerset. He is obsessive. He is compulsive. He is methodical. He is studied. He asks questions. Morgan Freeman's character comes face to face with his shadow self in this movie. And that now you're getting down to like deep, dark, like psychological study of human beings. And now you're getting into the marrow of what storytelling is about, which is the antagonist and the protagonist are really mirror images of each other. And they are actually, what we are all at war with internally. It's on perfect display here. And then to top it all off, you got this kind of this young hotshot detective who really wants a piece of this. But you got and I'm talking about Mills, Brad Pitt's character, and Somerset looks at him just like, you got transferred in from some small town, you're asking for the big city shit, like, good luck. It's gonna suck. You're not gonna like it. You're gonna hate it, actually. But I'll show you. I'll show you just how bad this world's gonna break you. It's going to, and it does. Fucking Somerset was right all along. It will break him in the worst way possible. Like, ask for the horns and you shall get them, is exactly what Somerset basically says at the beginning of this movie. And by the end, he's completely right. And Damon, now that goes to my my love of nihilistic films. Nihilistic films say you cannot stop the inevitable hell that is coming. The inevitable evil that will win. Evil will ultimately win is what typical nihilistic film puts out there. Seven is one of those films, but it does it in such a gripping way that you're just, even though in the end, like, it's all bad. Tell me you left feeling bad. You don't. You went on such a fucking awesome ride.
Well, I mean, when you meet David Mills' character, who's Brad Pitt's character, and you meet him, you kind of think right away, you're like, this guy's not really built out. This guy isn't really built for this. Like, he's like the guy who wants to go charging through the door, kick the door open,
Yeah.
point the gun to the bad guy, and get down on the ground, fucker, like he does when John Doe shows up in the police station. Like, that's who David Mills is. He is a hard charging, just grimy detective. Like, and again, you got to remember, and I'm not, this is not like any giant secret for anyone who knows what police do, but the vast majority of detectives aren't spending 18 days on a case like this. Like, they generally solve cases in a matter of days because most murders or most cases like this aren't this intricate. They aren't this involved. That's not the point. Really, what you're doing as a detective a lot of times is gathering evidence to make sure you can put the criminal behind bars. So you know the killer, you know who it is. You're just like, I got to make sure I get this and get this and get the right evidence, get the right witnesses so they can arrest him, put him in prison. And then when they go to trial, he goes to prison. They're not sitting there, they're not reading Chaucer and, the Marquis de Sade novels to like, oh, I'm exacting this, I'm rifling through these 7 deadly sins and figuring this out. But when you do get these rare cases of these serial killers, these really methodical, smart serial killers, like a BTK who has existed for years, or even like the Zodiac killer who existed for years and never actually got caught, that's where you get these certain detectives who are like a Somerset, who is very, again, as you said, his shadow self. Like if there's one, this is a perfect film. Let me be clear about that. But there's like one scene I wish we could have had. We kind of got in the car. But like, I wish we could have just seen an interrogation scene of like 20 minutes of Somerset and John Doe. We kind of got like the shortened version of that in the car where he's like, because there's a moment in the car, by the way, which I love, where he's just like, he figures John Doe out. He's like, you're preaching this sermon, but you're enjoying this. Like, this isn't painful for you. You're getting pleasure out of this. And he's like, I'm good at my work. He got him. He caught him. Because he realizes like, this isn't a selfless act.
And what is that, Damon? I have to interrupt you there because he's basically saying right back to Somerset, look at you. Yeah. You're getting pleasure out of this. But Somerset was set to leave and chose to stay on those few extra days to close the case.
Yeah.
He gets pleasure out of it too. So like, again, like they're literally meeting right in the middle. He's going, well, you get pleasure out of it. He's like, well, you do too. That's why you're here.
Yeah, and I love that though. I love that he called him out on that, and the reason he called him out on that is what you're talking about. This is like the dark version of Somerset. Like they are two halves of the same person. But as I was saying, like when you talk about the nature of this film, these detectives, and again, as I said, like Mills being the hard charging kind of jocular, amped up on it. Like there's that great scene where the photographer comes up and he takes photos and he chucks him down the stairs. You end up finding out later on that was John Doe. But in the moment, he's like, I feed off my emotions. And when he does that, he throws the guy. He's like, I got your badge, man. He's like, yeah, Detective Mills, MILLS, fuck off. And Somerset goes, it's pretty impressive to see a man feeding off his emotions, because Somerset, it seems like the kind of guy until the end of the movie, which of course we're going to talk about, his blood pressure, his pulse probably never goes above like 70. He is just the most even-tempered, and that is a scary serial killer. You read about a lot of serial killers.
Right.
They get a thrill, but they're not like the real scary serial killers are not the guys who are like amped up and excited. They're just like very methodical. It's almost terrifying. That's why they do what they do. Mills is the exact opposite. Mills is like, he rides on 120 all day. Like he is just, he is jacked up on caffeine and adrenaline from the time he puts that tie on in the morning until he puts his gun away at night. Somerset is the exact opposite. He's very exacting, very methodical. But seeing those two cops kind of interact with each other, and also what I love about this movie, remember, this movie takes place over 7 days. They meet on Monday. By Sunday, when John Doe turns himself in, their relationship has completely altered. And what I love about that is when you meet Mills at the beginning, when he's in that scene with the gluttony murder, with the fat guy, the guy who eats himself to death, he's just kind of mocking it, and he's just like, look at this guy, like this is sad, like this guy's so big, and how did he get out of here, and blah blah blah. And Somerset is just like, at one point he's just like, can you just fuck off, like go take witness statements, because I'm actually doing work here. And obviously Mills like, what are you doing, man? I do the same job as you. By the end, when John Doe turns himself in and they're in the interrogating room and he's dipping the tea bag, and the captain, played by Arlie Ermy, is just like, we got him, like it's over. And Mills is the one who's like, no way it's over. This guy would never end his crime spree voluntarily without carrying out his 7th deadly sin. And that's when Somerset has that great line where he says, for the first time, you and I are in total agreement. He's brought Mills all the way around to believe in his way of thinking. Now, I don't think that had Mills become just a detective on his own, would he have been as methodical and as exacting as Somerset? Clearly, that would never happen for him after the end of this movie. But he, in that 7-day span, he kind of rubbed off on him a little bit. He's like, I'm trying to tell you, this guy's not going to stop. This is not like
Yeah.
a one and done kind of thing. I told you that from day one. When we figured out that the greed and the gluttony thing were two things combined, I told you this is not going to stop. And Mills is like, I got it. I'll run with it. I'm good. Let's go. Let's go get him. And by the end, he's like, yep, this guy's not going to stop. It's not going to stop until his picture is painted, until his puzzle is completed. And Somerset's like, see, I finally fucking taught you.
And Mills had that great moment with John Doe where he was chasing him through all the alleys and stuff, and eventually John Doe gets the upper hand on him, has a gun to his head, dead to rights, and doesn't kill him. That tells him a lot there too. He's like, yeah, okay, like he's planning all of this. He could have shot me right there, and that could have been the end of me. But no, he spared me. Why? Well, there's a very good reason why, right? It all comes out. Should we talk about the ending now? I mean, it feels like we're naturally rolling into it.
All right, so I want to do a kind of a two-part conversation on the ending before we get to categories and everything else. I'll start part one with this part of the conversation. Is this the single greatest ending to a film ever? Because this is bleak, this is dour, this is devastating. Now, the second part of the conversation is I'm going to talk about what other people wanted, which is, oh boy, that's a whole other list.
I would love to hear that.
Now, listen, I admit that I'm not, like, I can appreciate a happy ending. I do. There are some films where it's built into that, where I'm like, I appreciate a satisfying happy ending. I do. I'm not going to say I don't like that. But when you get these perfectly built films where you get that dour, sad conclusion. Now, like I'd say Silence of the Lambs, which is also, I'm not trying to sit here and go back on that one. Like that is also very much almost a perfect film. I haven't really thought about it in a while, but that is an amazing film. That film, James Gumb getting away would not have been a satisfying conclusion. Hannibal Lecter getting away, is like a little bit of the traverse of that. Like it's the satisfying conclusion. They got the really bad guy, but the guy you kind of like, the charming psychopath, gets away. So it's a little bit of that. But again, that movie wouldn't have been as satisfying if James Gumb gets away. If James Gumb shot Clarice and that's how it ended, we'd be like, what the fuck? Like that wouldn't have been as satisfying.
Yeah.
Seven has one of the most dour, bleak, just devastating endings in film history, but it's such a shock because they got him. They got their guy. He's turned himself in. But you know something else is going on. You're just not sure what. And I love that line when they pull him out, when they pull him out into the field and he's like, what's that? He's like, dead dog. And John Doe goes, I didn't do that.
Not part of my plan.
But this ending is so bleak. And again, I know films have tried to duplicate this, and I'm not saying you can't do it, but this was one of the most shocking endings to a film ever made. And it is, again, I don't know. I'm asking the question, Patrick, is this the greatest ending to a film ever?
A buddy of ours, Colby Does Horror, just rifled off a bunch on his TikTok. Make sure to follow Colby Does Horror. He's a cool guy. We should have him on the show at some point. He had a list going that was pretty solid, and Seven wasn't on it, which is interesting. I still stand that The Mist is the greatest ending, and that's Frank Darabont's The Mist. Like the novella ends differently, but this is right up there with it because what you get is it's this weird like, and I guess that's kind of the thesis of this movie is like, what exactly is the satisfaction that you're looking for here? We're asking that of Somerset. We're asking that of Mills. We're asking that of John Doe. What ultimately is the satisfaction? Because what we get in the end, and for anybody, spoiler alert, here comes a 30-year-old ending, and one of the most famous endings in all of film history. John Doe's completion is that he is going to get wrath and vengeance, right?
Envy is his.
Envy was his. That's right.
Wrath is
yes.
Yeah,
envy. Thank you. Envy and wrath, right? So he was envious of Mill's perfect little life with Tracy, and so he killed her in a fit of envy. He killed her. So he committed a sin, which all the other killings, like he basically had the other person kill themselves, or he slowly had them die. Like he never just out and out strangled somebody, or he made somebody else do it. So he commits this sin of envy, and he knows, because he has perfectly placed Mills in a situation where he's going to exact vengeance on him. He kills his pregnant wife, who he did not know was pregnant, puts her head in a box and has it delivered to them out in the middle of this field, out in the middle of nowhere. And he's like, "You're now going to kill me, and you're going to complete my masterpiece, my statement on the state of the world. We are going to get everything we wanted. You wanted to get your bad guy, you're going to get him, but you're going to pay a price for it. You're going to pay a price for wanting to get your bad guy. And I played you like a fiddle. I played you perfectly into my game. I know you're going to pull the trigger on me, and this will all be complete." Incredible, because now even the audience is like, "Oh my God, Brad Pitt has to kill him. He has to. Mills has to kill John Doe. He has to, because of what just happened." But also, no, don't kill him, Mills, because you kill him, you give him the satisfaction. It's putting us in the same conundrum, in the same crisis of decision. It's brilliant fucking ending, Damon. It's brilliant fucking ending. Like, just to bring us, the audience, into that moment where all three of them are in this little standoff. Somerset desperately trying to get Mills to put the gun down, and John Doe just waiting, knowing it's coming. And you, as the audience member, start to feel sick, not just because this man's wife is beheaded and just down, a few yards away. You're also gutted because he's going to get his way. The bad guy's going to get his way. He's going to get it. And you're going to get the satisfaction of seeing his brains get blown out. But does it make you feel good? That to me, that quandary, that complex, that paradigm, that crisis of paradigm, that's the stuff of genius, Damon. But I'm guessing the follow-up here is that there was stuff of very much not genius that studio execs and other people wanted to change for this incredible ending.
Before I get there, I just want to say my own 2 cents on the ending. It is, like I said, it is, in my opinion, as much as I love The Mist, and The Mist is, again, if I'm going to make a list, it's going to be on the list, the greatest endings. Do you remember the first time you saw Seven? Because I don't. Like, I know
it's somewhere in there, in the late 90s somewhere.
Yeah, it came out in 95. I know I didn't see it in the theater, but I know I saw it because I've seen it dozens of times. It's one of my all-time favorite films. But I don't remember. So, like, I don't remember my initial visceral reaction. I sadly don't. Like, I don't. I was like a teenager when I saw this. So, sadly, I don't remember my initial reaction to watching the end of Seven. It bums me out. Like, if I could erase my memory and go back and watch this for the first time again, I wish I could, so I could remember exactly how it made me feel. It still makes me feel, even now that I've seen it a dozen times or 24 times, however many times I've seen this movie. But I wish I could, because there was a TikTok account I watched today that was doing a react. Now, they're reacting to the movie. If they're acting, they're doing a good job. They're acting like this is their first time seeing it. And they're showing their real-time reaction of, like, what they see at the end. And they're like, no, like that, Now, again, maybe they're faking it. But I know this is real. When I went to see this movie in IMAX over the weekend, and by the way, a packed theater. I was shocked how, like, crowded this theater was for 4 o'clock on Saturday. There was a group of guys behind me. There's like 4 of them. And one of them in the middle had said I heard him before the movie started, he had never seen Seven. The other 3 guys had. And he's like, so what am I in for? I heard them talking behind me as the movie's getting ready to start. And they're like, dude, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. So I was astutely listening throughout the whole movie to hear his reaction. Like, when Victor wakes up, he gasps. He's like, oh, shit. Like, I heard him gasp. So I know it was real. Like, this was not, like, I don't know why they'd be faking it, but, like, I heard the real reaction. When the ending happened, I was like watching, but I was also like listening to like, and I heard him just go, no. It was awesome. It was one of the best film going experiences of my life, because you're not going to get that. This movie's 30 years old. Like, you're not going to find that many people who haven't seen this and already know the ending. It was brilliant. And that reaction, that guy sitting there just flabbergasted, I'm sure his eyes were open. I wasn't like watching him, but I was listening to him, eyes open, and hear him going, no. no, no. I was like, this is perfect. And that is this ending because it is so brutal and so devastating. And to spoil a category we're gonna have come up in favorite line, when John Doe says, I envy was my sin, and he's like, and he says, I tried to play the life of a perfect man, it didn't work out, and and she begged for it, and she's like, and he's like, so I took a souvenir, her pretty head. And the look on Mills's face is like, what the fuck did you just say? And that's when you realize what's in the box. Oh my God. It is just, I mean, it is so it is, like I said, to me, it's the best ending of a film ever because of the real world implications and also just how devastating that would be. Because I don't have kids, you do, but I have a girlfriend I've been with for over a decade and I love her dearly. And I feel like I would be Mills in that role. Like, I know my visceral reaction. Like, I'd probably shoot the guy. Like, and again, that goes back to the real. Again, this is a very exaggerated real world, but still real world. It could happen. Terrible things are carried out every day. Put yourself in that position because you can't really put yourself in a position to miss. Like, you can't say like there's an alien invasion.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen.
There's an alien invasion. I'm gonna shoot everyone in the car. This one could happen. So in that moment, I'm like, could I control my emotions enough not to shoot this guy? I don't think I could. Like, I think I would just be like, as soon as he said her pretty head, I'm like, bam, 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 like, you're dead, fuck you. But so I just wanted to address that first. Now, the alternate endings. Boy, oh boy. So, when Jeremiah Chechik had this idea, he's like, the ending is too bleak. I want to change it. And again, Andrew Kevin Walker, being a young filmmaker, young screenwriter, had no idea this is, he should fight for it. He didn't, so they changed it. And the ending that he wanted was the showdown was going to be in a church. Okay? And he was going to capture Mills and like torture Mills and like he was going to have Tracy kidnapped. He was going to basically say, I'm trading you for your wife. He tortures Mills. He cuts a cross in his chest, and he sets the church on fire. Somerset kills John Doe. Mills dies, and then the ending is Somerset and Tracy saying, I'm leaving this city. I can't be here anymore. And that's the ending in the movie. Now, another version, this one is the worst. This
gets worse. Oh, okay.
That was bad. That's the one that Andrew Kevin Walker rewrote, thinking, okay, I guess like it's and clearly the real ending is much better. This is the one a studio person. I'm not going to name names, but a studio person had this idea. They're like, we can't put her head in a box. You can't have that be the ending. Sit down for this one, Patrick. They were actually going to have the box open up, and it was going to be a television screen with a video of Tracy in a chair tied to a chair. And he was going to basically torture Mills saying, I've got your wife. And so like the end of the movie was they rescue Tracy from her capture and they stop John Doe and they rescue Tracy. So the idea of the box was going to be there's a TV inside with like a video camera playing, like a video playing of her trapped in a chair or some shit. That was That was the ending.
No.
None of this. There's a couple other ones out there. There's one where, and I think Morgan Freeman actually said he did like this version. There was a version where it was basically the same ending with the head in the box, and Somerset actually ends up coming up and shooting John Doe to save Mills. Like to save him from that torture of like basically because Somerset was already.
I'll do it. Yeah.
I'm a depressed, my life is like, I've already I don't want to be here anyways. He was going to kill John Doe to save Mills. So Mills wouldn't go down this spiral of like his life falling apart after killing a criminal and killing the man who killed his wife. And it would just go, he would never get out of that pit of despair. And Morgan Freeman, I think, said, I actually like that ending because if you want a redemption story, it's basically saving David. That one's not as bad.
Yeah, I don't hate that one.
To think that anything would have been the ending besides what we got is like sacrilege to me.
The issue I have with Somerset saving Mills and taking the kill shot is that it's sort of a happy ending. Like it sort of says like, well, I guess John Doe didn't get his way. Like that that probably would work for a lot of people. That for all the people who hate like sour endings, and I know a lot of people who do, they might have been like, no, that's a great ending. You know, like and there's some poetry to that. It's just like, look, I'm literally Somerset, like I'm literally in the sunset of my life. I'm gonna I'll shoulder this burden for you, so you don't have you're gonna have enough to worry about after the events of today. Let me shoulder this so you don't have to, and that John Doe doesn't get what he wanted. That's kind of a happy ending, kinda, like sorta. So I could see that might be the best little compromise, but the fact that what this version does is it turns to all of us, the audience and Somerset and Mills, and says like, if you want satisfaction, it's going to cost something. You're you and I sit in that theater. We want John Doe to be dead. We are pissed for what he's done, but it's going to cost us Mills. It's going to cost us. It cost us Tracy in the process. You know, this sweet young Tracy who really just kind of wanted to start a family with her husband, and they were high school sweethearts, which I think was a great thing to set up. Like it was something, if you blink, you miss it. But it's important to show their level of commitment and care for each other. This was a true tragedy. I still prefer the most dour ending because that's the kind of fucked up I am.
Well, you remember there's a great line in the movie Training Day, which is an incredible movie, and Denzel Washington, when he's first talking to Ethan Hawke in the car, and he says, "Are you married?" And he's like, "You got a kid?" And he's like, "Yeah, I've been married, high school sweetheart, we got a little girl." And he's like, "I bet you still fuck her face to face." And he kind of fucks him a little bit, and Ethan's like, "I'd rather you not talk about my wife, man." He's like, "I respect that." And he's like, "You got to hide that love deep inside, because you got it pouring out your eyes that you're in love, and they will use that. These maggots on the street will use that against you. Don't ever wear that wedding ring to work." And that was like almost like a Se7en moment for me watching Training Day, because Denzel Washington realized in that moment like how in love Ethan Hawke was and how that could so easily be turned against him.
Yeah.
That was David Mills. Like, for as hardened and as jocular and as just full of testosterone and piss and vinegar as David Mills was, when you see him at home, when him and Somerset come to their house to have dinner that one night, you see how just incredibly in love David is with his wife. Now, he also loves his job, so he's a man of two worlds. He loves his job very much, but he's also very ambitious, but he loves his wife. There's no doubt about he loves his wife. The only thing he's doing wrong here is he's not realizing that she's miserable living in this city while he's out being a cop all day. But he clearly loves his wife, and as they said in that movie, it's coming out your ears. Like, you can see. So realizing David's love for Tracy and how much they mean to each other, John Doe using that against him is like the perfect ending. It's like the most brutal ending, because he realized, as you said, Somerset is the light side of his dark side. So there's no getting Somerset. You know what I mean? Like, you can kill Somerset. Somerset be like, sweet relief, fuck it, I'm done. Because he's not, he don't want to be here anyways. You can tell throughout the entire movie. Like, there's like, he's one step away from being like, fuck this, and I'm done. Like, that's Somerset the entire movie. David Mills has something to live for, and that living for is Tracy. And then to make it even worse, to just ratchet up the torture, he says she begged. She begged for her life, and the life of her unborn child. Jesus Christ, man. Like, the look of like...
And he didn't know.
And Somerset smacks him, and he's like, "Oh, he didn't know." Oh my God, I mean, talk about ripping your guts out and just stomping on him on the ground.
Yeah,
that is just so brutal. And like I said, what I love most about this, beyond, I mean, I say love most. I'm saying at least one of the 19 things I love most about this. You never see what's actually in the box. They never have to show you Tracy's head, her detached head, or her decapitated head in the box. Now, I saw an interview with David Fincher talking about, because they are releasing a 4K version of this later in January, and they were talking about like what was actually in the box. Because all these rumors, they had like a prosthetic head made of Gwyneth Paltrow. He's like, no, there was never that. He's like, we knew how much a human head weighed. It was like 8 pounds. I think Jonathan Lipnicki taught us that in Jerry Maguire. It's 8 pounds. They put an 8-pound weight in there. They put blood and they put like a blonde wig, so they knew that the blood could get stuck to the box, so they put blonde hair in there, so you kind of get an idea if it's got stuck to something, you'd see some blonde hair, which you do see briefly when he opens the box. She's like a couple strands of hair, and you see the blood, and you see Somerset's reaction. There was never actually a prosthetic of her head, and I also love that you never actually see it. And there's like this
Yeah.
rumor that at the end, when right before Mills shoots him, you see him like torture. He's like, "Oh no, no, no!" And there's a flash, and people are like, "Oh, they show the head." No, they don't. It's a flash of Tracy smiling in that moment,
Yeah.
and then he shoots John Doe. So there was never that, but I love that. Like I said, less is more sometimes. We've talked about this a lot in films. While we do love good gore and we love great, Terrifier 3 and all the great gore movies out there, much like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is not a very gory film. For such a brutal, fucking relentless film, there's not much gore at all in that film. Seven is the same way. We didn't need to see Tracy's head. We needed the reaction. I took her pretty head. She
Yeah.
begged for the life of her and her unborn child. That is so much more diabolical than actually showing us like a prosthetic head of Gwyneth Paltrow's head in the box. It's just it is incredible. By the way, I want to throw this out there. Did you see a couple years ago at Halloween the Gwyneth Paltrow dressed up and put a box on, and she dressed up as the head in the box from Seven, which
Yeah.
is one of the greatest Halloween outfits of all time. But that like it's just everything is great. Like there's again, I know I'm saying, you're like, dude, stop saying it. The reason this film is perfect is because of little things like that. They didn't need to show us their head in the box. They didn't need to show that.
There's a lot of horror in this movie. There's a lot of intense gore. There's a lot of really intense implied, like in the lust scene. The implications in the lust scene are absolutely like stomach churning. I think it's super important to make that choice in that moment and just go, we're not going to show what's in the box. We're going to leave that up to you. There's a lot of movies that do this where it's just like, The Eyes of My Mother is a great, a smaller movie that you should go check out, which is very much like this, where it's like sometimes it shows you some very awful things on screen, and then sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it lets you fill in the blanks. It's this really great balance of just being able to put you in the moment and make you uneasy, and then put you in a situation where you have to envision what's going on. And that, like, being able to balance those two things is not easy to do. It's not easy to decide when to show what, but when it works, it ends up like this, and it's fucking brilliant.
Well, I mean, imagine, I know you can't really imagine this, but I'm just throwing this out there real quick. Imagine in that moment when Somerset opens the box and he jumps back and gasps. Now, imagine if you actually saw her head. The next 5 minutes don't work the same way. Because when he says, I was envious of your life, I tried to live the life of a common man, of a married man. So I went to your house and I met Tracy, and, it didn't work out. So I took a souvenir, her pretty head. None of that works if you show the head in the fucking box. None of that works. The psychological torture of watching David Mills realizing this guy literally decapitated and murdered his wife, and then obviously also torturing him with the fact that he killed his unborn child, that doesn't work because we don't see the box again. Like, once Somerset sees it and realizes what's going on, he rushes back to stop David and try to, like, throw down the gun. He's like, California, get your people out of here. John Joe's in control. He's got the upper hand. We never see the box again. But imagine if they had showed that. Everything else after that doesn't work the same. That psychological torture of that moment when he says her pretty head, when you know that's what's in it, that is the tipping point of this movie. That is when you're like, oh, fuck. Oh, shit. Yeah. You need that. Also, that psychological torture, it doesn't work if you show the head.
Also, you show the head and you might shock the audience numb at that point. You might, because really it wasn't like it's not a movie like Terrifier where you kind of show up for the gore and like you're expecting it and you want it to be there. So if you show them even if it's just a flash, like they have to sit with that image for a while, and they might actually like lose the impact of what's happening next. Like you could even just show a flash of it. Like, oh, I just saw her face for like 5 frames. We saw her head in that box for 5 frames. then that's like setting in on you, and you're sort of living in the shock of that, and you're losing all of the great character work that's happening in that final crisis moment. So, I mean, I'm sure there were deliberations like, are we or are we not going to show this head? But ultimately, I bet David Fincher just goes, no. Like in this moment, it's not about what's in the box. It's about what's going on in the minds of everyone, including you, the audience. That's great direction where it's like time to pull you into this. And what they're pulling you into is the perspective of Mills. Mills can't see what's in that box. If you can't see what's in that box and Mills can't see what's in that box, you're in his shoes. You feel what he's feeling. You want to know, but you also don't want to see it, right? You're in, like, if you put me in that horrific situation, I want to see what's in that box, but anybody with salt would pin me to the ground and go, you'll never see what's in that box. You should never see what's in that box. So now you're in Mill's shoes as an audience member. Fucking that's how you do it, folks. That's why this shit gets the stamp of approval, the 5-star rating, whatever you want to call it. That's that shit. That's how you do it.
And it also happens throughout this movie. I want to point this out real quick before we get to categories. David Fincher, and by extension, Andrew Kevin Walker writing the script, shows us what they need to show us. When we deal with the gluttony murder, the heavyset guy who eats himself to death, that is a visceral reaction to seeing this giant, huge guy. And then underneath the table, you see his arms and legs have been bound, and that's when they realize this is a murder. You have to see that to totally understand it, right? Like, you have to know, like, this guy.
Yes, that's information, yeah.
Forced to eat himself to death until he burst. Okay, you need to see that. Now, the lawyer, Eli Gould, you never really see, you see photos of it, and you see the aftermath of the greed on there. You know what I mean? You see that. But you don't need to see him cutting the pound of flesh out of his side, and you see black and white photos. You don't see color photos, black and white photos. They tell you, but you don't see it. You know, you see the photos of it. So it's almost like it's not quite real. Like, it's real, but it's not quite real. But then when you get to Victor, you need that. That is one of the most classic scenes in this film when he says, "You deserve what you got, you son of a bitch," or whatever. And he fucking wakes up and, oh my God, he's alive. He's fucking alive.
Pure horror, by the way. Like a full-blown, like he literally looks like a zombie. I mean, literally looks like a zombie.
What does he say? He looks like a freaking wax figure, man. Like, you need that, right? Like, you need that reaction. And then, again, going back to, like, you don't need to see it, but to hear it. The scene with lust. Yeah. They show you this horrific contraption with a giant spiked cock, for lack of a better word, tied onto this leather.
I think that's a technical term, yeah.
Yeah. And you know what happened. But Leland Orser, I believe is his name, the actor's name, who they're interviewing. He's got the cover. He's like, "Get this thing off me." And they take him to the place, and he's shaking. He's like, "And he told me to fuck her, so I fucked her, and I fucked her." It's so over, like, just he's manic, understandably so. But, like, that scene works so much better than if you actually saw the aftermath of what he did to that prostitute. Him sitting there shaking and being like, "Hey, he had a gun. Oh my God, the gun is in my fucking throat. Fuck!" Like, that reaction, and then say even with the pride with the lady, you see the pills taped to one or glued to one hand. You see the phone, and then they have a bandage, but you don't see actually the aftermath of it. They tell you, he shows you what you need to see, and then he hints or tells you other things. I love the exacting nature of that bit of filmmaking, because you can't say this film's not gory. It's fucking gory as hell in the right parts.
Yeah.
But
visually disturbing and mentally disturbing.
You need to see the gluttony murder. You need to see Victor, or, you know, you need to see Sloth. You need to see certain things. But you didn't necessarily need to see Eli Gould literally shaving off part of his body, or you didn't need to necessarily see that. You didn't necessarily need to see the prostitute who got basically screwed to death with this giant spiked cock. You don't need to see just the awfulness of that. But you know, and once again, much like the head in the box, you're picturing it in your head. I guarantee at one point you're like, "Oh, Jesus Christ." He had this, and when they show you the photo of the contraption that guy in the leather shop made, Oh my
Yeah, it's
God.
horrific. You're just looking at a photo of something completely inert, right? It's just an object. You're just looking at an object, doesn't have any blood on it, nothing. Then you hear this guy talking who or not talking, he's fucking manic. He's fucking traumatized in the worst possible way. And he's describing what happened, and you're like, oh my God. And then even the shot in the actual club, you just see out of focus her legs in the background. And you're like, oh no, that's bad. That's so bad. And it gets you in the pit of your stomach, in the absolute pit. And this whole movie exists in a pit. It exists in bowels. Everything's blackened. Everything is dark. Everything is in the shadows. You are in the stomach acids. You are in the bile. This movie takes you there, but it takes you there in very clever ways. The amount of restraint that it can use in certain moments and then blunt force trauma in other moments is fucking brilliant, man. It's brilliant. Perfect.
Yeah, and I listen. I love Terrifier. I love those movies. I love the movies with great gore. Like I said, I'll be haunted by Martyrs forever. But the psychological torture in a film like
Martyr's
this
amazing.
sometimes is sometimes even more effective because, like I said, when you watch that scene with the lust with the prostitute, you never see it. But I guarantee you, every single person that's ever watched that scene, when you see that leather contraption and you hear him freaking out and saying, "He made me fuck," you're picturing it in your head, and that's worse.
Yeah.
You got to come up with your own vision.
Oh,
And that to me,
oh,
like I
it's
said,
bad. It's bad
I love
now.
Martyrs. I love those movies when they do. Like those are great movies. But this one, the psychological torture of that, because what you see in your head and what I see in my head aren't the same. They're similar, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
we've all thought about it. And when you have to think, when you have to conjure that in your
Yeah.
head, oh my God, it's just but again, it's the right moments. He picks and chooses
Mm-hmm.
what you need to see, because you couldn't do that, Victor. You have to see Victor. You have to see that zombie like creature that's been tied to a bed for a year. You need to see
Yeah.
that. But you
Yeah.
don't necessarily need to see the prostitute who got fucked to death by a steel spiked cock. It's just unbelievable. Patrick, we should get into some categories, and as we always do on this show, we're going to kick things off with our first category, which of course is our best performance. And boy, I tell you what, this is a movie just absolutely filled to the brim with best performance. But Patrick, I'll turn it over to you first. Who do you have for best performance in Seven?
My best performance goes to Brad Pitt as Detective Mills. I really enjoyed the many layers of Mills, right? Like you said, the braggadocious sort of like kind of almost frat boy quality. You know, this is Brad Pitt in his fucking prime, like young, good-looking guy, and also a great detective. He's not a bad detective by any stretch. He's just hot-headed and he's just impulsive. He's the opposite of Somerset. I just loved all the different layers that he gave us. He's also funny as shit. And I think most people know that about Brad Pitt. When you actually watch a Brad Pitt movie, you realize you laugh more than you think you do in a Brad Pitt movie. He's a funny guy. He's physically funny. He has great delivery. Like this is one of those movies where I can point to, and the other one I think of is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and another one I can think of is Babylon, where I just go, "That's a great actor." I can't say that about all his roles, but I can say that he has been great in moments, like really great. And I think Seven is one of them. I think Seven probably proved that he could do it all. I think that's to me, it felt like a culmination of sorts where I was just like, look at this guy. He can give you everything all in one movie, and none of it feels uneven. It feels perfectly balanced.
I mean, Brad Pitt's career has been filled with great performances. I'm not gonna lie, like he's one of my favorite actors. When I think of Fight Club, I think of, as you said, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There's a lot of movies that I love Brad Pitt for, but this one is one of his best and one of his strongest. And again, it goes back to the writing and the directing and everything else. I mean, again, remember David Fincher also directed Fight Club, which is one of Brad Pitt's best
Mhm.
performances. Um, you get the best of Brad Pitt. Like this is him as a leading man, but also as a bit of a secondary character. He's a bit of a supporting character in a way. Like obviously he's the lead, but he's also alongside Morgan fucking Freeman. You know what I mean? So he doesn't have to
Yeah,
carry.
it's a two-hander.
But yeah, this is like I said, this is Brad Pitt at his peak. And again, I want to be clear about this. There's a lot of Brad Pitt at his peak. He's done a lot of great roles. I want to say like this is it for him. I'm saying like this is the peak, but there's like four other movies you can also put at the peak of this. But he's so good. For me, I went best performance for the more obvious answer, which I think is Morgan Freeman, because again, we talked about it earlier. He was the first person who signed on for this. This movie's not the same. Now, I'd heard rumors. I'm sure you saw this. Maybe you're doing research online. There was a rumor that Denzel was up for Brad Pitt's role, which interesting in 1994 when this is filmed. It's a much younger Denzel. Maybe it could have worked. I don't know, but Morgan Freeman.
I didn't think this movie could get any more interesting. And then you add Denzel in there, who's to me is the greatest living actor. I'm like, now hold on a second. I thought I couldn't change this movie. Wait a minute, Denzel.
There was a
But
rumor
no, I mean
Denzel
either
was,
way, it's I think it's yeah.
yeah. But Morgan Freeman as the anchor of this movie and as this dour, depressed, just as you said, nihilistic detective. Like he's really good at his job, and as you said, he can't let it go because as we talked about, like we all need to solve a puzzle. He's methodical in that way. He doesn't want to let go of it, but he hates it. It's like this weird obsessive thing. It's like, in a way, it's an addict. In a way, he's an addict. Like he knows
100%.
he knows he shouldn't be doing heroin, but he can't stop doing heroin, and that's kind of what he's in. He hates it. He hates this job. He hates what he has to do for a living, but he knows he's good at it, and that's a hard. He's just I listen. Morgan Freeman is one of the greatest actors ever, period. Like, you think about Glory, you think about Shawshank Redemption, you think about all the roles he's done, he's incredible. But I think Seven is probably my favorite performances. I'm not going to sit here and say it's the best because everyone judges differently. There's going to be somebody who just says, I love Shawshank Redemption. And you know what? I'm not going to argue with you because that's an incredible movie. But me personally, this is my favorite Morgan Freeman performance because it's so exacting. And in a weird way, I know this sounds pretty dour and like, man, maybe you should go get some help, Damon. I relate to Morgan Freeman in a lot of ways in this movie. Like a lot of his approach to society, I've had some of those same thoughts. Like, he has a lot. Almost in a way, he's almost got a little bit. I guarantee you, Nick Pizzolatto based a little bit of Rust Cole in True Detective on Morgan Freeman from Seven.
Yeah.
That thinking man's detective, right? Like he's got that philosophical approach to his job. But I think that Morgan Freeman's performance this is my favorite performances. And I love Morgan Freeman, but he's just so, like, I believe it. I believe him in this role. Like, there's not a thing, like, if you showed me Morgan Freeman just took a detective job after doing this movie, I'd be like, fuck yeah, I hired with Morgan Freeman. He's going to solve your crimes. He's that good.
Well, you trust him. I think that's what the important thing is that you trust him in this role. He tells you the truth right in the beginning of the movie. He's like, this world is hell and I need out of it. I need out of it. And what you learn through the course of the movie is his plan. When we meet him, his plan was to get out, but the truth is he can't get out. He can't. He's a stuck individual. Like I said earlier, he has obsessive compulsive tendencies. He is addicted indeed to the work that he does because of those tendencies. And if he doesn't get out, it's going to kill him, right? And Morgan Freeman has an incredible amount of range, actually, if you watch his films. But I have never quite seen him play somebody like this who almost, I would say, maybe exists on the spectrum. It's just pure speculation. And I think like a lot of David Fincher main characters do. And I think David Fincher likes to explore those particular people that can live on certain parts of the spectrum and be actually very heightened and skilled at what they do. And that's indeed what Somerset is. I don't think I've ever seen Morgan Freeman play somebody that way. And he plays it in his own way. He's not copying anything. And this is not to throw shade on Dustin Hoffman. It's not a Rain Man performance. He's not doing that. He's not going too far. He's playing it in his way where he's like, I will let you in on without ever hammering anything over your head. I will let you in on the fact that like I am fully dysfunctional as a human being. And at the same time, he's the most competent person in the room. But we have to listen to him too. At the same time, it puts you in this great conundrum where you trust him, but you also know that that the obsession of all this is going to kill him someday, somehow, some way. This is where genius acting comes in. This is top shelf shit. I waffled back and forth between him and Brad Pitt because I knew these were the best guys for the job, and they did this perfectly. But
I
now I
want
want
to
to
say
see
one thing.
Denzel. I'm not gonna lie.
I want to say one more thing about this. One thing I love about the character of Somerset and the way that Morgan Freeman plays him is he's a guy who doesn't want to care, but he cares, and you can
Yeah.
see when he gets almost, I won't say forced, but when he gets drawn into that dinner with Tracy and David, and they kind of become friends in that moment. Like when they're sitting
Hmm.
there over a beer and a giant glass of wine, which is hilarious, going over the murder, over the greed scene photos, and that's when they realize that his wife must know something. Her eyes were circled in blood, and they start working together on this case. It's the first time they've kind of met on a human level, because up to that point they've been nothing but combative. Like Summer said, there's one point where Summer said, "You just met me, man. Like the fuck? Like how are you trying to judge me?" Um, Somerset doesn't want to be there because Tracy humanizes him when she's like, why aren't you married?" And then Mills is like, "Oh, Trace," and he's like, "I almost got." It humanizes him. It makes him care. And then when Tracy calls him and says, "Can you meet me for breakfast? I don't know anyone else." He doesn't want to go there, but he knows she needs him. And ultimately, at his core, he's not a bad guy. Like he wants to care, but he doesn't want to care. And when they're sitting down there, she's telling him about the kid, and he says, "I was going to be a father one time, and I just could not bring a kid in this world." But he's like, if you don't have this kid, never tell him. But if you have the kid, spoil that kid every day. And she breaks down crying because deep down inside, he doesn't want to care about it. He wants to be cut off from this awful, horrible world. But deep down inside, he cares. And that's what's breaking him in this moment, is that he actually learns to care for Tracy and he learns to care for David. And just like that opening scene in the movie when he's like, "Was the kid here?" And the other detective's like, "Dude, who the fuck cares? They're dead. Did the kid hear anything? Who cares?" He does care. As much as he's this methodical thinking man's detective, he cares. And he's trying to shut that off. He tries throughout the entire movie to prove he can shut that off, but he can't. And I love that portrayal. Patrick, let's tackle the 900-pound gorilla in the room, an actor that we did not pick best performance because we specifically wanted to talk about this performance separately, and that is Kevin Spacey as John Doe. Now, many, many moons ago, we reviewed a film called The Burning, which is 100% a movie that feels like Friday the 13th because it was actually written before Friday the 13th. It just came out
Yeah.
after. We talked about it. We both liked the film, but we had a very deep discussion. This is going back a couple years. So, again, we're rehashing it now, but I'm sure we've got so many listeners who have never heard that Burning episode. People who don't know, the screenwriter of The Burning is Harvey Weinstein. Scum-sucking piece of garbage, rot in prison for the rest of your life. Harvey Weinstein was the writer of that film. And we talked at that point about separating the art from the artist. Kevin Spacey sought out to do this movie. He loved the script and he's like, "I want to do it." Originally, I think he wanted to try out to be Somerset, or he was going to try for another role. Ends up getting John Doe. Now, again, I'm not saying he's a good guy. But when they made this movie, David Fincher had to go to Kevin Spacey, who was already a star at that point. He was a legitimate, known actor. He had to say, "Hey, can we not put your name in the credits? Because if people see your name in the credits at the beginning, some people are going to see about halfway through the movie that you're not in there. And they're going to figure out that you're the killer. So can we leave you out of the credits and you don't see it till the very end? When the movie ends, you see, and Kevin Spacey is John Doe." And Kevin Spacey's like, "Absolutely." Now, you may think to yourself, that's not really a sacrifice. The fuck it is. Talk to actors about credits, and they care. They want to see their names in the credits. I'm not saying they're all egotistical, but you do work, you want credit for it, right? Like, that's just common sense. The fact that he's like, "No," and you and I both know a lot of people, as soon as the movie's over, they just get up and walk out. They don't even stay for the credits.
Right.
The fact that he's just like, no, I want to keep the surprise. So don't put my name in it. Don't put it on the poster. Nowhere. You do not know Kevin Spacey's in this movie unless you see the movie. He is so chilling and haunting as John Doe. Now, again, not certainly excusing who Kevin Spacey is as a person, but I think occasionally you have to separate the art from the artist, because I just rewatched The Usual Suspects the other night. He's so good in that movie. I'm not defending him as a person. Clearly, I'm not. But we can't not give him credit for what this role was, because Just like we talked about Morgan Freeman, I know you're now being seduced by Denzel playing Detective
Very
Mills,
much so. Yes.
but you couldn't imagine somebody else playing Somerset, and you certainly probably couldn't picture anyone else playing John Doe. He's brilliant in this film. I know, terrible person, brilliant actor.
Every actor that takes the role, they make their choices, and I think if you hear a lot of actors, and this always comes up in interviews where they go, oh, I heard you were up for the role of this or whatever, and they go, it ultimately went to the right person, because ultimately every actor is going to make the choice they make, right? So I'm very intrigued by the idea of like, what choices would Denzel have made? Because I want to see those choices, please. Okay, AI overlords, fine, you got me. Give me Seven with Denzel Washington in the place of Mills. Kevin Spacey makes his choices, and it's interestingly enough, he knows how to play a very slimy worm, and he does it really, really well in this film. It's funny. I was watching it, and especially during the interrogation scenes, where he's just sort of sitting there meekly, I thought of a movie we talked about recently, Red Rooms, and I think of the guy, the killer in that. I forgot what his name was.
Ludovic Chevalier, yes.
Ludovic Chevalier, wormy, wide-eyed, frail, seemed kind of harmless. Actually, didn't actually seem like much of anything. That's what Kevin Spacey played in this film, even though he played small. He rounded his shoulders inward. He made physical choices. He made choices in the where to put the octaves of his voice. It was a little higher pitched, and it was a little more, light and almost like taunting. There was sarcasm put on it. All these choices add up to something that is very creepy, that is very chilling, that is almost inhuman. You see, he almost feels like a robot in some way, shape, or form, because indeed he made the choice to say this man actually doesn't have any humanity. There's certainly like a philosophy there, which is humanity's broken, and I'll fix it. I'll fix it with my work. They'll talk about this for decades. They'll do all of this stuff, but ultimately, you watch the voice and the eyes and everything that's as he's saying it, and you go, this guy is inhuman. And indeed, serial killers have something very much broken in their brain. They are not human. They think they are. They don't function like we function. And he made the choices to do that. And it turns in something that's incredibly haunting, that is deeply memorable, because you just go, oh God, like that. It feels a little close to reality in that moment. When you're finally face to face with this killer, you go, oh, yeah, that's probably accurate.
Yeah. There's a great moment in this movie where Brad Pitt's just like, oh, he's a wacko. He's a fucking whack job. And he's probably sitting in his room right now, masturbating with peanut butter or whatever he says. And Somerset stops. He's like, no, don't dissuade him like that, because you're disregarding how smart this guy is. Like, you don't do these things without being smart. Now, he may be a sociopath, a psychopath, a lunatic. All those things can absolutely be true, but don't disregard him for being dumb, because he's not dumb. If he was dumb, he would have been caught right away. That's what happens a lot of times. But the way that Kevin Spacey plays this role is so haunting and chilling when you finally meet John Doe. I mean, that moment in the police station where he's like, detectives, you're looking for me. And he's standing there with his fucking fingers all bloodied up and taped up and covered in blood. And they put him down on the ground, and the cop puts the handcuffs on. And he comes up, blood's all over his hand, which you learn later on was Tracy's blood. Oh my God. Controversial statement, Patrick. I'm going to make it right here. And this is not prisoner of the moment. But if I'm going to compare roles, Kevin Spacey as John Doe to me is more chilling and more haunting and more like creepy than even Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. Now, I'm not saying that's not great. Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, right, Academy Award-winning performance. I'm saying in the serial killer role, because they made Hannibal scary but also kind of charming. There's nothing charming about this fucking guy. Like, there is nothing. you get in the car and you're like, I don't want to be in the car with this guy. Like, I do not want to be here with him right now. You know what I mean? And David's constant need to disregard him is what ultimately comes back to bite him in the end, because obviously he did not see this coming with what happened to Tracy. Somerset knew this guy was capable of that. But the way that Kevin Spacey plays him is again, it's like it's so exacting and so haunting and so chilling. And like that, like going back to the Hannibal Lecter thing, like there's part of it's like I kind of want to talk to Hannibal Lecter. Like this guy's like there's something kind of intriguing about him.
But his
He's a
charm
little,
is his danger.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the thing. Yeah.
But this guy is so fucking disturbing that you're just like, I don't want to be in the same room with this guy. Like, I don't want to be in the same car with this guy. This guy is out of his mind and he's terrifying. That performance, again, separating the art from the artist, this is an all-time performance. Kevin Spacey is who he is. Not defending anything he's ever done or will do or whatever's been done in the past. But you can't ignore the fact that this movie is not this movie without Kevin Spacey.
It's not. Yeah, because of the choices that are made. And it'd be interesting to even see Anthony Hopkins in this role making these choices. You know what I mean? Like, what would his choices have been? And I don't know that I necessarily agree that he's better. I would just say different. They made different choices. Their characters also have completely different backgrounds and stuff like that. So it's more of just like, this really worked for Seven. That really worked for Silence of the Lambs. And they're both great. That's the thing, is they're both just really knockout performances.
I guess when I say better, what I mean is scarier. I guess that's really what I'm getting at. Like he is a scarier character to me. Like it's a scarier performance because there's just something so disturbing about John Doe.
Yeah.
And the fact that his name is John Doe. There's just like I said, like
Yeah.
there's
Oh, he's definitely scarier. I mean, Buffalo Bill is scarier in Silence of the Lambs. I'm definitely more scared of him. We're supposed to be charmed by Hannibal Lecter, but also we're supposed to be like, oh shit, is he manipulating me into liking him? He probably is, and I don't have a way around it. You know what I mean? Like, and that ultimately is the problem with him, is that he's very good at sucking you in. So again, yeah, it's just there's so many different variables in there that I wouldn't go one's better than the other. I just go, I'm really glad that this performance exists, and I'm glad that one does too, because it's more for me to chew on.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to our next category, Patrick. Let's talk about our best kill, or should we say our best sin? Because we get to see all seven ultimately in this movie in one form or fashion. So, Patrick, what is your best kill / best sin in Seven?
It's the one that fucked me up all those years ago when I very first saw this movie, and that is Sloth. Indeed, Victor Miller, was that the name of the character?
I can't remember the last name. Victor, yeah, he had a different name.
Yeah, Victor Miller. Yeah, Victor Miller. When he is revealed, it's pure horror. And that's really why I picked this, because you go, okay, yeah, okay, it's, you guys are skirting the line here. This is essentially a thriller. I go, this is as horrific as a thriller can get. When that moment when he starts coughing and convulsing on the bed, and he looks like an absolute ghoul, like something right out of a Bernie Wrightson comic, like full blown ghoul who is sucking for air and gasping and trying to claw at the air. You're just like, Jesus fucking Christ, this is dark. Like it was one of those things that when I first saw it, it like got me. It got me in my stomach. I was like, oh God, that's too much.
Don't tell me, by the way, we didn't do best scare because while this is a horrifying, terrifying movie,
Yeah.
that moment when Victor wakes up will make anyone jump out of their skin. That is one of the scariest jump scares in film history because you think he's dead, and then he jumps up and he's like, oh, you're like, oh my God. It's so good. It is like the best jump scare ever. But when they pull that off and the one cop in the background starts coughing, and like you just realize like how bad this is, the bed sores and the needles, and it's just, man, it is horrific on a whole other level. And again, that goes back to what, because Summer said, as you said, he understands the killer. He's like, imagine the nature of this, to plan this a year ahead of time, to keep this guy bound to his bed, come in there, I assume daily, to give him drugs, tend to the bed sores. They say that we found antibiotics in his body to treat the bed sores so it didn't become infected. Like, imagine the fucking just the disgusting imagination and patience to do this for a year to this guy. Oh my God, it's just, it's so, oh man. So for me, it ultimately came down to the lust murder. And I'm not going to rehash what I already said because it's not the visual of this one. It's the interrogation afterwards that gets me.
Yeah. That's
It's
everything about
it's
that whole scene, Damon. Let's be real.
it's it's
Everything about that
Leland.
scene.
It's Leland Orser, who is a great character actor, who's been in a million things. You know him, you see him, you're like, oh, I know that guy. And also the great Michael Massey. Tragically, he's gone. Of course, he played Fun Boy in Crow. He had a very sad life because he was well known as the guy who fired the gun that sadly killed Brandon Lee accidentally, but it haunted him forever. He was in this movie. He's the club owner, and there's that great scene with Brad Pitt. And he's like, "Do you like these things you do?" And he's like, "Hey, man, I don't condone it. I don't, I just point the way, man. I'm not responsible for what
Yeah.
people do." And he's like, and he's like, people come here with packages all the time. Like he's basically, this is my life, man. People come in here and do horrible, fucking crazy shit to each other.
He's just like everybody else in this movie. He's like, I'm doing my job, dude. It's a dark
just
job.
like, just like the guy in the leather shop, and he's like, "Oh, I built way worse stuff than this. Like this is nothing." Like he's like, "I think I undercharged it actually." But like that scene with Brad Pitt, where Brad Pitt is the interrogator, and he's not really he kind of interrogates when he's like, "Didn't you hear anything? Didn't you see anything?" And he's like, "I see that. This is the shit I see every day." And he's like, "Do you like what you do?" And he's kind of giving him morality. And the guy's like, "Hey, it's not my job to judge people. Like this is what they want to do." But then Leland Orser's portrayal when he's like, "Any baby fucker," and I'm not going to rehash it, but that is just so visceral. Then you see the photo, and you know what he did, and you're just like, "Oh my God!" Like that just seems like the absolute worst way to die, like ever. So
yeah, that's a theater of the mind that I would love to board up and never have to visit again.
yeah, like but that performance, the Leland Orser, that's all I need. Then you see the photo, the little Polaroid. I'm like, "Oh Jesus Christ!" Just combine those things, two things together, will haunt me forever. That's the one for me. Patrick, let's move on to best line. Now we both picked two. Just so everyone knows, I could pick like 10, by the way, for this movie. Do you want to set up? Do you want to set up your first? I'm gonna go in. I'm gonna go in chronological order. So you're set up your best line, and then we'll do your second best line.
I'm going to tell you something right now. I can't remember what the setup was for my first best line. I'm just looking forward to hearing it.
It is the scene right after they discover Victor in his house, and they take him. They're like, "I did double quick on that ambulance."
Oh, okay, no. Okay, that was chronologically correct. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. I was jumping ahead to my second line, which I now don't remember why I chose it. But yeah, no. The first line I chose was the description of Victor Miller and understanding just what sort of hell. Well, I'll let them do the talking, Damon.
Yeah, the mobility seems about right, judging by the deterioration of the muscles in the spine. Blood tests show a whole smorgasbord of drugs in his system, even an antibiotic, which must have been administered to keep the bed sores from infecting.
Now, has he tried to speak or communicate in any way?
Even if his brain were not much, which it is, he chewed off his own tongue long ago.
Doc, there's absolutely no chance that he might survive.
Detective, he'd die of shock right now if you were to shine a flashlight in his eyes. He's experienced about as much pain and suffering as anyone I've encountered, give or take. And he still has hell to look forward to. Right.
So good. So brutal.
He's still to look forward to.
Yeah, because Victor Miller was not a good guy in real life anyway, and so it's just the description of that of the absolute torture that he went through for a year, and all he has to look forward to is hell. Like it just that I don't always like need dialogue to tell me things, but that's one of those ones where you're just like perfection.
Yeah, he chewed off his tongue long ago. You're like, Jesus Christ, like that's just so fucked up, man. And this is going on for a year. Oh,
yeah,
man,
year
that's just. So now your second one, I will set up. This is from the car when they're driving out to the middle of nowhere, and it's Somerset and Mills in the car, and they're talking to John Doe in the background. That's your setup here for your second play, and I'll go.
Thank you, Damon.
That is your second quote.
Wanting people to listen, you can't just tap them on the shoulder anymore. You have to hit them with a sledgehammer. And then you'll notice you've got their strict attention.
Oh, Damon, this line, Let me tell you why I chose it. It is still relevant. Now, if the best thing you could do with your movie is make something that's evergreen, that will last for decades, and here we are talking about this 30 years later, which I can't even wrap my mind around the fact that this is a 30-year-old movie. You still have to do this with people. Times have changed. Okay, they don't sit in front of MTV anymore. They're on their phone, consuming whatever they consume, but the message is the same. No one listens until you bash them over the head, until you shock them. We think we've come so far, and I hear a line like that and I go, oh my God, we haven't. That's just as relevant a line today as it was 30 years ago. Nothing has changed there. And that's why I had to put that in there.
100%. It's absolutely true. It's like it's not your problem until it becomes your problem. Like, you don't think about when other people have happened to them.
Yeah.
When it happens to you, you're like, oh shit, maybe I should have paid attention to this, or this law that passed, or this, whatever it is. Like, this thing happened in my apartment building. When it happens to you, you pay a whole lot more attention. So yeah, that's a sledgehammer to your face, and that's 100% true. So Patrick, my two lines are actually right at the tail end of the movie, and I had to play the very famous line, the interaction between Mills and John Doe. How could I not play this at the very end? This is the most chilling interaction, and the one that will just absolutely, your jaw gaped on the floor.
Do you hear me, Detective? I'm trying to tell you how much I admire you and your pretty wife.
What?
Tracy.
What'd you fucking say?
It's disturbing how easily a member of the press can purchase information from the men in your precinct. I visited your home this morning, after you'd left. I tried to play husband. I tried to taste the life of a simple man. Run away! It didn't work out. So, I took a souvenir. Her pretty head.
What the fuck's he talking about?
Give me your gun.
What's going on over there?
Put the gun down.
I saw you with the box. What was in the box?
Because I envy your normal life.
Put the gun down, baby.
It seems that envy is my sin.
Oh, what's in the box?
I tell you, give me the
What's
gun.
in the fucking box?
Give me the gun.
He just told you.
You lie! You're a fucking liar! Shut up!
That's what he wants. He wants you to shoot him.
No! No! You tell me that's not true. That's not true.
Become vengeance, David.
Oh, she's all right. You tell me.
Become wrath.
Tell me she's all right!
Oh, just become
Insanity.
become
Yeah.
Oh, it's just the psychological
Andrew Kevin Walker never needed to write anything ever again. Like, I know his career has sort of had its ups and downs, which pretty much everybody does in the career, but to write like poetry like that, like sick poetry, just nihilistic, nasty poetry like that, that's a thing of beauty. It doesn't come around often, Damon. There isn't a ton of times where I'm like, that is dialogue that needs to be celebrated, like 100%.
And my final quote is the last line of the movie, the very closing line, and it's because I was an English literature major and I was forced to read a whole lot of Ernest Hemingway books when I was coming up into college as an English literature major, and it's the line that closed the movie from Morgan Freeman.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I agree with the second part.
Yeah. It's a perfect ending. Because when that moment when he tells him, when he's like, when the captain's like, we'll take care of him, and he's like, if you need me if he needs anything, call me. And he's like, where are you going to be? He's like, I'll be around. Because he knows, like, he can't abandon David.
Yeah.
He can't abandon him after this. And
yeah,
when he says, he's like, I agree with the second part. It's not a fine world.
Yeah, not a fine world. But the second part is right. It's worth fighting for, which is, again, truer words are never spoken, right? Like, I can't look out into the world and tell you, oh, everything's all right. Like, everything's all right in my little bubble. But at the end of the day, it is worth fighting for. Like, that's fucking perfection.
Yeah, it's so good. Now, we've talked all podcast long about how just brutal this movie is and relentless and just brilliantly written and acted and performed, and it's dour and it's dark and it's methodical, and it's a amazingly horrific movie in so many ways. But weirdly, this movie is also filled with a lot of laughs. Now, I know that sounds bizarre to say that, but it's true. This movie is also hilarious at the right moments, and we couldn't not talk about a couple of those really funny moments. And by the way, in my theater with that guy sitting behind me, he laughed at these exact moments that we're about to. Everything you mentioned, everything I mentioned, are both the moments that this guy laughs. So I was like, it does work, still works to this day. So Patrick, do you want to set up your first? You had two, and I picked two as well. So do you want to set up your first laugh? And this was more. I pulled a quote, but it's more of a visual, so you have to kind of set it up. But it's just the way it says it. So.
So you have the audio for this?
I do have the audio. You want me to play it first? You want to play it first, and then kind of go from there?
I'll just at least describe what leads up to this audio. So basically, both Mills and Somerset are just getting played by John Doe. They don't have leads. They are getting led around by him, and they are realizing it. As good cops, they understand, like, shit, we are really screwed. This guy is winning. And so Mills, the very funny Brad Pitt in this moment, he bends over a desk and explains what John Doe is doing to them.
Nah, he's fucking with us. That's what he's doing. See this? This is us. Yeah.
When he bent over the desk, see this? This is us. Everyone in the theater cracked up. It was so
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another thing that makes this movie perfect, Damon. And we're gonna show a few more moments where it's just like, for such a heavy, crazy movie, it gives you moments to laugh. If your movie is all seriousness, you find out very quickly, like, oh, I needed to put something in there to lighten it up every now and then. This movie seems to know exactly all the different places to do it.
Now, your next quote, would you like to set this up and just tell us how many people you knew in college that did this same kind of thing? Because I know I sure did.
I don't. I can't tell you that I knew anyone who did this. I was just a geek like that I knew how to pronounce this correctly. But indeed, Mills being a little bit more of a frat boy, I'm assuming that back in college, he didn't quite read this book. He didn't quite have a handle on what this was. But I loved how he explained the title of this book.
Divine Comedy, History of Catholicism. It's a book called Murderers and Madmen.
Modern homicide investigation in cold blood of human bondage. Bondage?
Not what you think.
Okay. Marquis de Chardin.
The Marquis de Sade.
Whatever.
Marquis de Sade.
Marquis de Sade, whatever.
Whatever.
And so the other best part about that is like when Somerset tries to help him, he gets him all the books from the library, and he goes and gets the Cliff Notes version. That's just so perfect.
Yeah, he just gave him Cliff Notes. He's like, here, just take this. A great visual gag. Like if you're paying attention, that's such a funny thing. He's like, I'll just give you the Cliff Notes.
And I know, by the way, at some point during this podcast I've mispronounced someone's name, but I always try my absolute best to do research. Yeah. And sometimes it's just impossible. But like I remember when I was interviewing Duncan Regehr from Monster Squad, who played Dracula in Monster Squad, I had called him Rieger for years just because I thought that's how you pronounce his name. And I watched like 10 interviews to make sure I got his name right so we get a Duncan Regehr. And so I watched it like a bunch of times to make sure, because I'm like weird like that. Like I don't want to, I've done that where I've mispronounced someone's name before and I feel terrible about it. So when he says the Marquis de Chardin is the Marquis de Sade, he goes, whatever.
Whatever.
so perfect. All right. So I have two as well. And this first one is also set up from Brad Pitt. It's when, again, Morgan Freeman in a weird way is kind of praising the killer because he's like, this guy's not dumb. Like he's not stupid. And the line that David Mills unravels with him is just so perfect and so hilarious. So this is that scene.
This guy's methodical, exacting, and worst of all, patient.
He's a nutbag. Just because the fucker's got a library card doesn't make him Yoda.
The fucker's got a library card, doesn't make him Yoda. It's hilarious. Now, this is such a throwaway moment in the movie, but every time I watch Seven, I crack up laughing at this moment. It's such a throwaway moment. But in my theater, everyone burst out laughing. And it's the scene where they're going through after the Greed murder, and it's Somerset and Mills, and they're talking to their captain, played by Arlie Ermy, and it's so perfect. It cracks me up every single time.
There are 7 deadly sins, Captain. Gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, pride, lust, and envy. 7. Hold on.
That's not even my desk.
Cracks me up he just said, "This not even my desk," just hangs up the it's such a throwaway moment, but it's so like, I wonder, I've not read the script, but like, I wonder if that's actually in the script, because it feels like that almost feels like someone rang the phone on set and he's just like, "This ain't even my desk." He hangs up and Fincher's like,
yeah, like, would the phone even be working on set? Like, yeah, like, it's such a weird situation. But yeah, Arlie Ermy in that role, you never would have guessed it. You never would have read that script and go, "It's Arlie Ermy." But once he's in it, it's just fucking perfect.
And you got to remember, like in Full Metal Jacket, as brutal and as relentless as his Sergeant Hartman is, he's funny. Like, there are some funny moments in Full Metal Jacket. Like, you legitimately laugh at some of the stuff he says. That's just, he's like, "It's not even my desk." It just hangs up the phone. It's so great. Patrick, let's move on to our next category. And this is a controversial one, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. And that is remake, sequel, or leave it alone. Now, I'm going to go first here. I already kind of mentioned it earlier, so I'm just going to kind of reiterate this, but I'm going to throw a little wrench in the works here.
I like wrench.
Never, ever, ever contemplate remaking 7. If the studio executive suggests that, fire him tomorrow. Do not touch this movie. It is perfect. Don't fuck with it. I don't need to see a 10-episode HBO version. I don't need to see a remake with different actors. I don't care. Do not remake this movie. But here's my caveat. Andrew Kevin Walker wrote another script after this movie called 8mm, directed by Joel Schumacher. Now, much like David Fincher disowns Alien 3, Andrew Kevin Walker disowns 8mm because Joel Schumacher changed his ending so much that he's never watched the movie. To this day, he refuses to acknowledge it. It's just like David Fincher with Alien 3. I've read. Now, it's not, I like, they added a lot more quippy dialogue and they made it a little less serious, even though 8mm is a pretty dark film if you haven't seen it.
Pretty heavy movie, yeah.
But Andrew Kevin Walker's version is even darker. Like, it's even darker, if you can imagine that. And the ending is really dour, like really off the rails. He said publicly, like, if you want to remake one of my movies, remake that one and do it the way I intended. So that's my suggestion. Don't fuck with 7, but let's see the version of Andrew Kevin Walker's 8mm and see what he would have done. I love 8mm, by the way. I think Joaquin Phoenix, Nicolas Cage, Peter Stormare, like, it's a great movie. I love that movie, but I would love to see his version of the movie because he hates it so much that he wants his version. So I'm like, you know what? Don't fuck with 7. Give us his 8mm. So that's my suggestion.
How about this? Give us his 8mm directed by David Fincher. Like, let's just put them back together again. And like, why wouldn't David Fincher do that? You know what I mean? Like, believe me, David Fincher loves to fucking show how great he is. Be like, I could do better than that. Let me show you how I can do that. Why not? But nice way to side skirt the entire question, Damon. Yes, of course, remake, sequel, or leave it alone. My answer would be to leave it alone, but I'm predicting right now, it's 30 years old. In 10 years, don't be surprised if you hear a remake. Really, don't. Don't be surprised if there's a remake within the next 10 years. Don't be surprised if there's a remake in the next 70 years. It's going to be one of those movies. Like, I think for the longest time, Night of the Hunter has not been touched. It's considered one of the greatest, like, horror, gothic thrillers of all time. It's finally being remade, some 80 years later, however long ago it was. I can't exactly remember the date. It's getting remade. And people were like, "Oh, don't even touch that thing." They're touching it. Nothing's untouchable in this business. 7 will get that treatment at some point because we all recognize what it is, and that is indeed one of the perfect films. But there's going to come a time where we're going to see a remake of it. Will you and I be alive at that time? Part of me hopes not. Part of me hopes that it's so far in the future that I don't care because I'm dead and gone, like old Victor Miller, like a rotting, withered husk of a human body that I can never ever bother to see a remake of this movie. But I do think it's coming.
And I don't know what the box office was because this was released exclusively on IMAX this past weekend, but my theater was packed. At 4 o'clock on a Saturday, I was shocked at how packed it was. If this movie ends up making a little bit of money, it may come sooner than later because they're like, hold on, people still love Seven? Oh, shit, let's see if we can make some money on this. So don't be surprised. And you're right, I won't be surprised, but I just really hope they don't because, like, man, like, as you said, I'd rather be dead and just not see this because I do not need to see Robert Pattinson playing David Mills. I like Robert Pattinson. I do not need to see him playing that role. I'm sorry. Yeah, so let's just let it go. Patrick, last category as always, is it scary? I think we can pretty much answer this one pretty easily. So Patrick, at the end of the day, Seven, is it scary?
It's very chilling. It is a very chilling, very disturbing movie. As we've talked about, there are proper jump scares, there's proper horror on display, but most importantly, Damon, the secret ingredient to all great horror, dread. I mean, dread from moment one to the final moment. You don't feel comfortable in your skin watching this movie, and that to me goes a much farther way than like jump scares and gore and all that good stuff. And there's a little bit of that in this movie. But ultimately, this movie unsettles you, and it takes a long time to resettle yourself. In fact, rewatching this, like, kind of brought up old feelings about how this movie has made me feel over the years. It's just one of those movies that gets all the way into your bones.
This movie gets under your skin in the worst ways and the best ways possible. It is relentless. It is brutal. It is terrifying. It is horrific. It is psychological torture in so many ways. It is, again, for like the 19th time, it is the perfect film. It is the perfect psychological thriller. It is a horror film, and it is horrible in all the right ways. So yes, it is absolutely scary. And I'll say one last thing about the brilliance of this film. I didn't bring this up earlier, but I want to talk about the dour nature of this film. Every single day of this investigation takes place on a dark, cloudy, rainy day. It's just a miserable experience. You can tell they were just like, this is a miserable place to be, just raining nonstop. The very last day, sun shining, John Doe turns himself in, and they're like, things have turned around. Sun's shining. We're going to take him out to this place where he wants to close out this case. They give you a glimmer of hope. The sun's out. That's right. Like, that's the entire movie's been shrouded in darkness and clouds and rain and storms. Finally, the last day, it's sun shining, and you're like, oh, they're going to solve the case. They give you that glimmer of hope. We caught the guy. This is the end. But there's no happy ending. And so I love even that little detail, that little glimmer of hope they give you. It's now sunshiny and nice out, and you're still gonna this is the worst ending ever. Like, the weather didn't matter. You're going to be haunted by this ending forever. It's perfect. It's brilliant. It's everything you could want in a thriller. It's everything you could want in a horror movie. And I don't throw that around lightly when I say this is absolutely one of the greatest films ever made.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I give a lot of respect to a horror film that can scare you in broad sunlight. Like, that's fucking rad.
Yeah. And I know David Fincher and Andrew Kevin Walker worked together more recently. Did The Killer, which was on Netflix. That was also written by him. I know he did extensive rewrites on Fight Club. I know he did work like quietly on that movie as well. But I know, of course, David Fincher did Zodiac, which is a really good movie as well, which is a true story about a serial killer. I would love to see these guys team up on something else similar. I know Andrew Kevin Walker has a new movie coming out called Psycho Killer, which has Georgina Campbell from Barbarian coming out in the relatively near future. They're filming it, and it's a serial killer story as well. I would love to see these guys team up on another like dark horror type film. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I hope it does because I would love to see it. Patrick, that's our episode for this week. As always, I want to say a big thank you to everyone that tunes into the show. Make sure you check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course over on our YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. Even if you don't watch us on YouTube, it means the world to us if you subscribe. It does a huge bit of difference for our algorithm and our search results and things like that. So please search and find us and subscribe to us over there. And you can also find the podcast, video, and audio versions over on our website, rewindofthelivingdead.com. As always, want to say a big thank you to everyone that tunes in. If you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, your thoughts. Do you remember your reaction when you first saw Seven? I would love to hear some reaction like that, because like I said, sadly, I don't remember. I don't remember my initial reaction. Send us emails, rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. Or hit us up on social media. You can find us on Twitter /X, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. You can send us messages over there. We always try to reply every single one as much as we possibly can. So send us messages over there. We would love to hear from you guys. And I would love to hear if anyone remembers their visceral reaction to watching Seven for the first time, because sadly, I don't. Like I said, if I could erase this, watch it again for the first time, I would love to redo that. But unfortunately, that's not possible. But I would love to see that reaction. And as always, if you want to reach out to us on our personal social media channels, you can do that as well. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, to everyone that tunes into the show. We will be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.